Hey, what's up, Street Talks? Eric from the Eric from Street Photography blog. Currently walking here on the streets of Hanoi and wanted to give you some tips about street photography. One of the first tips I have for street photography is don't just take one or two photos of the scene and run away. The biggest issue that myself included do is when you see something that we want to photograph, we get really scared and nervous and we just take one or two shots and run away. My recommendation is try to work the scene. So as an assignment, next time you see a good photo scene, you have to take at least 10 photos of the scene. Some of my personal best photos, I've shot probably 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, 60, sometimes even 100 photos of the scene. So that's tip one, work the scene. Tip two, look at the edges of the frame. Often when you're shooting street photography, and this applies to any type of photography, to make better compositions, don't look at what's in the center of the frame. Look at what's on the edges of the frame. And if you want to work on this assignment, I recommend using a camera with an electronic viewfinder, using your LCD screen, or even shooting on a DSLR with a viewfinder. I know this is a little bit more difficult to do with optical viewfinder with a Leica or a Fuji or anything else. One of the big benefits of shooting with an LCD screen or even your smartphone is what you see is what you get, which means you can just you can frame a lot more accurately. Tip three, incorporate more diagonals into your photographs. The biggest beauty of diagonals in photographs is that it's pretty easy to do. In film, they call it a Dutch angle, where you just slightly tilt the horizon. And by incorporating diagonals into your photographs become much more engaging, they become more edgy, they become more dynamic. Your photos have more energy and soul. So even on my Ricoh GR version 2, the way I have it set up is I have it that I added a diagonal grid overlay to the LCD screen, so it reminds me when I'm out shooting in the streets to incorporate more diagonals into my photos. So a simple way you could do this is when you're making images, tilt your camera and try to make one of the edges come from exactly from the bottom left or the bottom right corner, or the top right or the bottom left corners. I'm actually not a big fan of rule of thirds. Rule of thirds, where you divide the image into thirds, because it's more focused on horizontal and vertical lines, whereas diagonals are much more engaging, dynamic, and interesting than vertical and horizontal lines. Another tip I have for street photography is when you're shooting street photography, it's okay to ask for permission. I think there's this weird thing in street photography. It's like, oh, if you shoot real street photography, it has to be candid, you can't talk to your subjects, and you have to treat them like photo things that you're just gonna upload to the cloud. As street photographers, we are humanists, meaning we love human beings. Why else would we photograph human beings? And to be a street photographer really means that you have to open up your heart and your soul to your subjects, and you have to make yourself vulnerable. And I think street photography isn't worth it unless you take some sort of personal risks in your street photography, which means you have to give yourself the opportunity to get yelled at, to be judged, to be rejected. The good thing about asking for permission is that you give agency and power and the ability for your subject to say yes or no. And for those of you street photographers who don't like being photographed yourself, I recommend one of the best ways to overcome your fears of shooting street photography is make sure that you feel comfortable being photographed yourself. For example, I know a lot of us are very self-conscious, we don't like to be photographed. We make the wrong assumption that because we don't like to be photographed, nobody else likes to be photographed. Whereas in reality, there's a lot of people out there, like vain persons like myself. I love to be photographed. I love being on the other side of the camera. And therefore, when I photograph other people, I don't feel weird or bad about it. And I convey my confidence through my willingness to be on the other side of the camera, and that makes my subject feel more comfortable. So even another practical tip you guys could do in street photography is, let's say you see somebody on the streets and you want to photograph them, you can first approach them and ask them, give them your camera, make sure they don't run away with it, ask them to make a portrait of you. So give your camera to your subject and say, hey, can you take a photo of me? And then after they do that, you say, oh, do you actually mind if I made a photo of you as well? So there's kind of this reciprocity, there's this exchange. It's not just you stealing their soul and running away with the image. The last tip I will have is just smile. There's nothing more disarming than a smile. It's universal, works in every country. Doesn't matter if you're in London, South Africa, Tokyo, whatever. Just smile, take a photo, smile, and say thank you. So these are just some practical tips. Learn more on the Eric Kim blog. Peace out.